On the show today, we've got Phil Etgart, who is a DJ, principally a ska, early reggae, rocksteady DJ, but I think he's probably got some surprises for us in terms of records he plays. He's made major record compilations. He's been in the business since the early 70s. He's known internationally as a purveyor of Jamaican music, much of it extremely rare, and he's brought along 6 of his own musical selections. And I thought I had a few records, but I've got to say that of these 6 selections, I've only got 1. So that either tells you something about Phil's musical range, or it tells you something about just how much reggae music there is out there. So, Phil, welcome to the studio. And
hi, Geoff.
Yeah, good to have you here. And if we start off with how you got into the music, which I think was back in the 70s.
Well, where it all started, I was kind of born and brought up in West London, and at the grand old age of 11, having just sat my 11 plus exam as it was at the time, we went off on a sort of school holiday in I think it was the April of 71, and I lived in a house where the radio was always on, music was always on, and no doubt I'd been exposed to kind of various other Jamaican tunes that had hit the charts and got limited radio play on Radio 1. But basically on this particular holiday and on this particular day, on the Tuesday, that was the day that I'd actually managed to grab a chair on the back row of the coach, which, if you think back to your childhood, was a fairly big deal. Sounds a bit soppy now, but as kids we love sitting on the back seat. Exactly. And back then on a Tuesday, the new BBC Radio or BBC Radio played the new chart. There was a new number 1, and that particular record kind of spoke to me in a way which I don't think a record had kind of spoken to me before. And that record was Double Barrel by David Ansel Collins. So kind of that really was the starting point for me. Within, I suppose, 18 months or so, I got my first Saturday job, and every penny I got from that basically was going on to buying vinyl. Initially, I was basically going into shops and ordering kind of back catalogue stuff from the 60s, which was mainly mainstream groups, kind of The Who, Pretty Things, Kinks, things like that. I then started to sort of trawl second-hand shops for similar things, A, because they're more affordable, and B, because they also turned up things that were no longer in catalogue. That kind of led me into Motown, Atlantic and other 60s soul, and then in looking for that, I began to pick up the occasional sort of Island and Bluebeat 45. From there, I began to then seek out stuff by either on labels I liked or artists I liked, or producers that were credited on the labels that I liked, and my kind of collecting bug grew from there. So by I would guess about 1974, I'd more or less given up on new music completely, and was basically scouring street markets, charity shops, junk shops, wherever second-hand kind of records turned up, and particularly 1960s Jamaican music, which there was very, very little interest in from a collector's perspective at that time. I mean, certainly as late as immediately before the birth of Two-Tone in 1979, you could sort of wander up Portobello Road Market on a Saturday morning and more or less fill a carrier bag with old 45s, sort of reggae and ska and rocksteady stuff for £1, because there really was no interest in it. And it sounds dreadful now, but I used to buy anything that crossed my path if it was cheap enough.
Which it
and
was.
Yeah, well, exactly.
Yeah,
literally pennies. And I can remember kind of jumping on the tube back out to West London, and I'd be sitting on the carriage of the Central Line looking through the bag, wondering what I'd actually bought. And then when I got home, playing stuff in the bedroom, then just basically the ones I liked I kept, the others I threw away. I mean, Lord only knows what I slung out, but they had no value as such in those days. Yeah, an interesting thing there as well is I remember when, occasionally when I was playing ska sides, and my dad's head would suddenly appear around the bedroom door, to listen to a particular song or tell me that he liked a particular tune, and the instrumentals were his favourites. And I think that basically was because he liked the horn arrangements in them, because they kind of went back to his time playing in bands pre-war, and the kind of big band horn arrangements and stuff like that. And he thought this was, very refreshing musically, by comparison to, if you like, the guitar groups that were prevalent in pop music in the 60s and early 70s. In trawling around for stuff, the kind of major labels that I used to trip over in terms of Jamaican music inevitably were Chris Blackwell's Island label and the Melodisc Bluebeat imprint, and early Bluebeat tunes, the ones I think that you would regard now as shuffle rather than ska, certainly things that predated ska, I particularly took to, and first of my selections today is one of those. It's from a guy who I was privileged to meet and get to know a little further down the road, although I didn't realise at the time when I was buying these records in the 70s that would happen. He became a friend of a club that I DJ'd for, Club Ska, appeared for us there several times, and indeed we ran a fundraiser for him when he was in hospital ill towards the end of his life. And all sorts turned out for that. Yeah, Dave Barker, Dennis Al Capone, Jake Vincan span a few tunes, and even Prince Buster turned out. Such was his esteem for the man, and I think Buster took the view that he really was the first, the man I'm talking about was the first of what you would regard as contemporary Jamaican artists to actually be recorded. First recording Mento in the days of shellac, and then on vinyl in the very, very early days of shuffle ska, and indeed one of his, I suppose one of his first tunes, one of his first biggest hits, more or less launched Chris Blackwell's career. That was a tune called Boogie in My Bones and Little Sheila, but the tune I've chosen today is one called Bouncing Woman, which is a particular favourite of mine from the legend that is Laurel Aitken.
I've got a woman and she's 9 feet tall. Well, I've got a woman and she's 9 feet tall. She's a bouncing little woman, she's just like a rubber ball. She'll hold me and squeeze me and tell me what to do. Yeah, she'll hold me and squeeze me and tell me what to do. She'll pinch and tease and say, honey, I love you. Well, she bounced last night and the night before. She bounced and bounced and bounced me to the floor. She's a bouncing woman. Yeah, she's a bouncing woman. She's a bouncing little woman. She bounces all the time. Last night and the night before, she bounced and bounced and bounced me. She's a bouncing woman. Yeah, she's a bouncing woman. She's a bouncing little woman. She bounces all the time.
What do you really like about this tune? What sticks out for you?
I think it's got a kind of raw honesty about it. it also clearly shows or clearly reflects the link between ska and the forms of Jamaican music that followed later on, and rhythm and blues, and particularly in the case of this one, I think New Orleans style rhythm and blues. Yeah, it's a very key period, I think, in terms of the launching of the Jamaican music industry, when kind of supply of R&B grew up, and home recorded records were being made initially for sound system play, and then from kind of the last quarter of '59, pressed on vinyl.
I mean, I heard this tune for the first time yesterday when you told me what your selections were. And first of all, I mean, I thought I'd be looking for a tune from '69. I mean, everybody associates Laura Lakin with boss reggae and '69 reggae and so on. This record was made in '61. When I listened to it, you know, it could have been American R&B. And there's not much in it to suggest that it's Jamaican. It's got the, you know, really big brass riff, you know, not just a horn and a trombone. It's big, you know, like the R&B records of that time.
I mean, you mentioned before that you assumed that it would be a kind of '68-9 reggae thing when you saw the name Laura Lakin. I mean, it's very, very easy to forget how important an artist he was in Jamaica in the later '50s, with a lot of his classic Mento recordings, and then kind of '59 through to about '62-3, with a lot of this style of what I call shuffle ska, which really was the replacement for the dried up source of American rhythm and blues. Kind of Laurel's career in some respects took a bit of a hiatus, I guess, when he emigrated from Jamaica to the UK, and took a few years to get back on track in terms of larger commercial success. But the recordings he made prior to coming to the UK, I think, you know, are fairly undervalued and fairly overlooked these days,
I mean,
which is a shame.
You did compile a collection, didn't you, of Laura Lakin tunes?
Yeah, I mean, there was a series of CD compilations that were put out by a label called Cherry Red some years ago, and I can't remember exactly how many, but there are 8 or 9 volumes, and it more or less collected up every available recording of Laurel's that we could access at the time. Basically, that came about because a good friend of mine, Mark Wyeth, who is the principal behind Club Ska that I mentioned earlier, basically also works in the legal world, and he was executor of Laurel's estate on behalf of Sandra and Laurel's children, and took control of the catalogue for them. So as a result of that, we were able to control what was being issued, how it was being issued, and when it was being issued. And whilst I didn't have any direct involvement in compiling any of the CDs, I wrote sleeve notes for several of them and provided a fair bit of source material for them. Sat down and spent some time with Laurel in the past when he was at, for example, when he was at Club Ska. I mean, one of my great memories is one of the nights when he played for us, and kind of after the stage performance, we had a sort of separate lounge off to the side. I suppose you'd call it kind of artist hospitality thing, but we were sort of sitting in there talking to various different people. And I think I had a fairly lengthy conversation with Rico that night as well. I think he was around. But Laurel, kind of all of a sudden, mid-conversation, we were talking about the roots of music in Jamaica and what went before local recordings and his history of music, particularly with him coming from a kind of, if you like, Cuban background. And he, all of a sudden, jumped up, opened the lid over the keyboard of the grand piano, and started playing and singing some sort of traditional Cuban music on there. And that, you know, that memory sticks with me to this day. Don't think he's ever recorded anything like it at all, but it was an absolute delight just to hear him kind of singing and playing the music he would have heard as a young man, as an illustration of part of his musical story.
The second selection you brought along is Jay McNeely, Big J Shuffle. Well,
yeah, that's a personal favourite. I mean, over the course of the years, we touched before on the work I did on the Laurel Aitken CDs, Cherry Red, but I've also been involved in a number of other projects, a number of which were a label called Fantastic Voyage. And within that, there was a series of CDs I put together, 3 CD sets, in fact, 4 volumes of which have seen the light of day so far. And the driving idea behind that really was a theme of sound system classics. And when I say sound system classics, I'm really purporting to the music that was played prior to what we might regard as contemporary Jamaican music being recorded. So I guess the stuff of sounds were playing from the very late 40s when the first small sound systems grew up, through to the later 50s when a kind of supply of fresh American rhythm and blues and jump blues and so forth was drying up, and the home recordings, like the Laurel Aitken tune we previously discussed, were made. The idea behind the series basically was to document what was being played by those sound systems in the 1950s, basically before it all evaporated into the ether and that knowledge was lost. So a lot of time was invested in basically researching what tunes had been played, history behind certain tunes and so on and so forth. And I think from memory the Big Joe Shuffle tune is on the first volume. It was one that I had a particular fondness for. I mean, I've always had a kind of fondness for honking baritone saxes anyway, but particularly instrumental rather than vocal tunes. And basically this one, as I kind of researched the history of it, it kind of tumbled out that it was a tune that had been a big favourite also of, one of the guys who brought sound system culture to the UK, Duke Vin. And apparently Vinny won a cup clash at Brixton Town Hall in 1958 with this tune. There were 2 other sounds playing, can't remember both of the names, but I think one of them is documented as being a sound called Boot, which is a particularly bizarre name for a sound system, unless that was the name of the kind of owner-operator. But Big Joe Shuffle is fairly typical of the type of jump blues instrumentals that Jamaican sound systems would have played in the 1950s, because it has the pedigree of being a cup-winning tune for Duke Vin and its personal favourite. That's why I chose it.
Okay, the next selection you brought down is Blake Boy, who is actually Winston Blake. He died earlier this year, didn't he?
I believe he did, yeah. Sadly, we're at that point in the life of most of the artists and producers and people we hold dear, where that's becoming an increasing likelihood. We're all getting older, yes, as is the music.
We're all going the same way. Now, that's a a take to Lord Deliver Us by Alton Ellis. What made you choose this particular record?
Well, again, there's a West London link with that. By 1975, I got involved in my first sort of DJ work, if you like. Did the occasional kind of party at school and for friends and things like that, and then joined a local hospital radio station where I kind of learned to hone some of my presentation skills. I then started looking at kind of club and pub work, and there was a music pub fairly close to where I lived at the time in Northolt, called The Target, and I got to know the regular DJ in there, a guy called Alan George. He played oldies which had been favourites of his in the past, and Alan was one of the regulars at a couple of the sort of local West London kind of skinhead venues in the I suppose at the turn of the 70s and the early 70s, one of which was a relatively famous, at least locally, venue in Northolt called the Byron. And of the handful of tunes that Alan still played and still carried about in his record box from those days, was basically the cut of Lord Deliver Me, the DJ piece, Especially for You. And from basically doing warm-up slots for Alan at the gig at the Target, I started to play some of these tunes. There was that, there was Handicap's the Law. Another one that comes back to mind is My Love by the Gay Lad. That's where I got to know that tune, got to know and love it, and really picked it today just as a reference to the start of my time DJing.
That men do, Lord, deliver from our lack of communication too, Lord, deliver from the people who misunderstand. We must learn to love if we want to be right on. Teach us to love one another, to treat each man like a brother. Was made for you, so cheer up if you're feeling blue. We must do good when we can. It might make someone a worthwhile man. Lord, deliver us. Understand? Lord, deliver us. I'm only a man.
I mean, what strikes me about Especially for You is the way it's produced. It seamlessly fits in with Alton Ellis's lyrics. You know, he doesn't seem to be going over the lyric. You know, there's just a seamless feel to it.
Yes, it's a really nicely put together record. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, you think about, I guess, early 70s DJ records, and you know, inevitably, I guess you think about people like you, Roy, and Dennis Al Capone. But there's some very, very fine examples of the art by, you know, far less well-known artists, such as Especially for You. I mean, I've got to be honest and say that if there was a period in Jamaican music pre the advent of digital that was my least favourite, then that probably would be kind of 73 through to about 75, 6. I think the music just got very, very lazy, very, very laid back at that point. I mean, I don't know if you can directly blame Bob Marley and the Wailers, but it's certainly true to say that once what you might loosely title as boss reggae stopped selling as well in the UK, wasn't getting as much radio coverage. I think the Jamaican producers perhaps put less effort into producing records specifically for the UK market, and that meant that kind of the residue of what was recorded and available were tunes that would have appealed more to a Jamaican audience. sweeter tunes that wouldn't necessarily appeal to people that had bought tunes by sort of 1969 Upsetters or Laurel Aitken or whoever else. I think the other thing as well is that when the Wailers were first being marketed by Chris Blackwell over here, when he signed them formally to Ireland, the strategy really was to market them to a rock audience, hence, for example, with the first album, Burning, I think, or rather Catch a Fire, not Burning, there are actually two entirely different mixes. There's the Jamaican mix, the original mix, and then there's the UK one with the overdubs, which was designed to be sold to a rock audience. And hence, I think at that point, the fact that Blackwell also took Bob Marley's name off the front of the band and they became the Wailers because it sounded more like a rock band.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably another contributory factor as to why people who had enthusiastically kind of followed Jamaican music through the boss reggae era, almost as if you like, a revolt against mainstream pop and rock music, suddenly felt alienated by what they saw as the spearhead of Jamaican music at that time.
I mean, the whole way we listen to music has changed now because we don't have record shops anymore. There's a few, but it's nothing like what it used to be. And record auctions used to be really big. There might be a few, but there aren't many. I mean, what's your recollection of the age of record shops and record auctions?
Oh, well, certainly in the mid-late 70s, as far as shops went, I mean, on a Saturday I had a kind of regular route that I went to, starting kind of Portobello Road and then gradually working my way into the West End. So there was probably, at least half a dozen or more shops that I'd visit each Saturday, and they would be a sort of mix of reggae specialists such in the West End, such as sort of Daddy Cool when they were in Hanway Street, and Maroons tunes down in Greek Street for the few years they were there, and second-hand shops, the Royal Trawlings and stuff like that. There were far more shops than you would ever have time and money, to actually explore. As far as auctions were concerned, I've only really got involved in the auction scene probably about 15 years ago, and that was principally through the auctions that were being run at Peckins. But you can certainly see a big shift in what's happened with that auction and many of the others that have fallen by the wayside. And really that's as a direct result of the internet.
Well, the internet's changed everything, hasn't it? I mean, really ultra rare records you can now hear on YouTube, and you can download them and they get repressed. The
other thing that's changed with the internet as well, really, Geoff, is that also, because of the plethora of product it's actually brought into the market, records that people once thought were significantly rare are now around in quantity, and things that used to sell for significant sums of money sell for very little at all now. I mean, a classic example of that is a Dennis Al Capone tune called, I think My Voice Is Insured for $100,000. Yeah. And there was a time when that was a really sought-after tune prior to the internet. Fairly hard to find, and back in the late 90s, I think it used to sell for around £100 or so. I mean, these days you're lucky to get a fiver for a copy because there's so many of them around. I think what's happened is the internet has been a great leveller in some respects, in that people realise that records they once thought were rare actually aren't that rare, and thus the prices of those have settled. But what it's also done, I think, behind that is identify a next level of records, in fact, rare things that are genuinely rare that most people didn't even know existed, and it's brought them to the light. And, the problem with that then is that because of the ready availability of information on the internet, everyone seems to know the price of everything and the value of nothing. But as a result of which you end up with large groups of collectors all chasing the same handful of tunes, which when they do come up, sell for insane sums of money, way beyond what they're really worth. Right, it's a really, really strange market.
So it's a bit like society as a whole. You've got a tiny number of super rich, and below that you've got the 90%. If you take,
you got the rest of us, yeah.
If you take, I mean, you're well placed to observe all of this because you sell records. You sell original records and you sell represses. We'll just take another selection, and then maybe you can talk us through your experience of actually selling records and what's going on in that market. The next tune you brought along is Pocket Money by the Gladiators, which I think came out as a version 12-inch. It was originally on Groovemaster.
Yeah, it was a Tony Robinson production, yeah, so it would have been on a Jamaican issue, would have been on TR Groovemaster, although off the top of my head I can't actually remember if it was a Jamaican issue or not. I certainly bought it on a UK 12 and on Virgin. And again, that kind of moves the story on another year or two. I guess around about the latter half of 1976, with the advent of punk, I was listening to new music again. And certainly, one of the key presenters within that time and that field was John Peel. And as I'm sure you know, John used to slot in about 4 Jamaican recordings into each programme, and in those days that was about the only place, other than I think Reggae Time on Radio London, which Steve Bernard presented on a Sunday at the time. Peel was the only place, and certainly the only place on national radio, where you could really hear any Jamaican music. And it was really a toss-up between a number of favourites that I probably first heard through John Peel. The other one that almost made the cut was, again, a disco mix by Culture called Trod On, which is just a phenomenally good record. But Gladiators, Pocket Money, and particularly the dub version of it is one that I bought and just played relentlessly for months. I mean, the Gladiators are a very, very fine vocal harmony trio, traditionally Jamaican vocal harmony trios, but the rhythm itself is absolutely brutal, and the dub really opens up, and it's a wonderful, wonderful record.
Yeah, I mean, this is a real sound system classic, isn't it? You know, it's got the rhythm, it's got the lyrics, and the harmonies that you're talking about. I mean, they're as close as they were back in the Rocksteady days, but when it took very, very heavy rhythm indeed.
Well, that's how the Gladiators, as I'm sure you know, first recorded in the Rocksteady days and just progressed forward from that. As far as I can remember, I think their first recordings for Whirl, but certainly were recordings for Coxsone from the very late 60s forward. And the stuff for Tony Robinson they recorded basically followed on straight from their time at Studio One.
Yeah. I mean, for me, because the era of the 12 inches was really quite limited. I mean, obviously you still have 12 inches, but in numbers it was between maybe 77, 83. That was the heyday, wasn't it? So for me, you know, these 12 inches have got a particular sound.
Well, so certainly from the very early ones, which I guess appeared probably 76. I mean, I remember seeing kind of Soul Dance 12s in 75 that Contempo put out, but I think probably the first reggae ones were sometime in 76. And as you say, although the genre continued well through the 80s and into the 90s, really, in terms of a 12-inch being a crafted disco mix, as opposed to being a vocal with an instrumental section nailed on the end, it probably was pretty much over by, as you say, sort of early mid-80s.
Going back to your experience selling the music, how long have you been in the business and what have you seen over that time? I mean, for me, there's been enormous inflation in prices for original reggae vinyl.
In terms of when I started selling music seriously, I suppose, I mean, I had some involvement in the 80s and 90s in basically supplying music to a stall on Camden Town Market for about 10 years, and then when that came to a kind of grinding halt, at that point, I then got more involved in selling, if you like, contemporary reissues. I'd always bought and sold records, I always would do, but in terms of buying some new music, that was something else. And the event of eBay in the late 90s kind of created a window of opportunity where I could buy stuff at wholesale and then sell it through eBay. And those kind of humble beginnings of selling a few represses that way evolved into the full-time business I have now, selling repressed and reissued new vinyl, in tandem with which I still buy and sell previously owned, if you like, second-hand vinyl, which I have done for virtually my entire life, because I'm in a ridiculous situation where I can't even get my records at home because there's so much other vinyl stacked in front of it. In terms of what's happening with pricing with original Jamaican music, again, that links back, I guess, to the conversation we were having a few minutes ago, where, if you like, the rarities behind the tunes that we thought were rare in the pre-internet age are coming out into the light. And I think particularly in the last 5 years or so, some fairly well-heeled, I'll use the word in inverted commas, collectors have come into market. Now, whether they're collectors in the sense that we were 40 years ago, or they're kind of speculative investor collectors, I don't know, but because they seem to have a significant disposable income, just with a handful of those players in the market, it's driven the prices of the rarest items way beyond the reach of people who have been collecting the music for decades. I see records that I've been looking for 20, 30 years, 40 years turn up now, and I haven't got a hope in hell of buying them because I just don't have the wherewithal to do it. And it's sad in a way, and you can only hope that the people that are buying those tunes are buying them out of a love of the music and not as a speculative investment.
My feeling about rare records is always that a rare record is something you don't have. As soon as you've got it, it doesn't seem rare anymore, does it?
But it's like the chase for anything else, really, Geoff, isn't it? The minute you've acquired it, with records, you clean them, play them, put them on the shelf, and you're on to the next one. Yeah. And I guess that's the same with any kind of acquisitional aspect of your life.
I remember Bob Brooks saying to me 20-odd years ago, sort of gesturing at his, records in his shop in Portsmouth Road. Within 10 years, all of this is going to be on sale in Sotheby's. That hasn't actually happened, but, maybe there are investors out there who are buying the music to turn a profit on it. I don't know.
There are certainly specialist music auctions, although they don't seem to have reached the world of Jamaican music yet in terms of the major auction houses, but I think it's only a matter of time when there are collections of fine enough quality, and that really is an issue with a lot of the stuff that's coming onto the market now, that frankly, the condition just isn't there for the money they're selling for. So it's a question of items of fine enough quality for the auction houses to regard them, if you like, as antiques and collectibles, and also enough well-heeled buyers to be there to drive the prices up to make it worth their while.
Do you think there's a new generation coming on the scene who are listening to all this music on YouTube and they buy the represses and they find a hunger to have the original?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a bit counterintuitive, but maybe the exposure of the music online is actually driving the market for the originals.
Well, it is, and it's an interesting thing. There's kind of two schools of thought. The one thing you're seeing is that as time moves along, so do the tunes that seem to be kind of in greater demand with the younger generation, and it's fair to say that most of the younger people that are coming into the hobby now, rather than collecting ska reggae, boss reggae, and even to a degree roots, although obviously there are some who've come into our end of the genre, seem to be collecting mainly late 80s and 90s and beyond digital, and the price rising in some of those items are absolutely staggering. And the interesting thing there is that there seems to be a pattern that once a tune from that genre is repressed, its exclusivity is lost, and it seems to negatively affect the price of original pressings. Whereas with ska, reggae, rocksteady, if something's repressed, it seems to bring it to the broader attention of collectors, and if anything, drives up the price of originals.
Your final selection is Barry Brown, another classic 12-inch single produced by Linville Thompson. And that's Natty Dread No Run.
Yeah, I mean, again, that was a difficult choice to make, because what I wanted to do really was represent the time in the late 70s, early 80s, when, I mean, I kind of take the view that sound system was probably at its height, represent, I guess, the style of music that I enjoyed most, and I felt was the dominant style. And certainly, I mean, if you look back to the late 70s, then, yeah, Barry Brown was basically musically everywhere, and pretty much running things on sound systems at the time. And I kind of a recollection in the back of my mind that there was a series which I think David Rodigan broadcast on Capital over about 6 weeks, where he interviewed different or people from different sound systems of the time. And again, this would have been about 1980 or something, I think, when I think Roots Rockers was a relatively new program. And I think from memory, one of the interviewees was Festus, and then there was someone from Moran Basser and Fat Man, and I think Joe Youth was another sound that they interviewed back then. But I think the one common theme through virtually all of those interviews was everybody was playing pieces of Barry Brown and Duff. And I can't remember who played it, but I remember a particularly brutal mix of Natty Dread No Run. It's always been a favourite of mine. In fact, I think, to be honest, the latest Strong Like Samson, it's hard to find a Duff tune in there. It's a really consistent label, albeit short-lived. But for me, this tune pretty much is the peak of that label's output, and pretty much the peak of Barry Brown's output, and a great representation, albeit in kind of polished commercial form, of what the sound systems, were playing hard at the time. That's just a great tune. Yeah. Fabric of your life, Geoff, that's what it is.
Yeah. So, Phil, if people want to hear you DJ, are you playing out at the moment?
Well, sadly, no. They're out of luck, Geoff, to be honest. I mean, I took the view about 18 months ago, and really for multiple reasons, that I would actually stop DJing for the foreseeable. To be honest, I was playing a lot of gigs that were kind of 69 reggae and ska, and 15, 20 years ago, that was great. There were very few events on. They were well supported. People came out, they enjoyed themselves. You could basically play more or less what you wanted within reason, provided there was quality to it. Over certainly the last 5 years, the amount of gigs on really has reached a level where there are too many for them to be reasonably supported. As a result of which, if you want to keep a dance floor busy, then you can only do that playing safe. And it just became boring, to be honest, playing the same records weekend in, weekend out. Also, with the disappointing financial support that's given to DJs promoters, it was the case more often than not that I was going out and playing and ending up out of pocket by the time all the overheads were taken into consideration. So I took the view that rather than go out spending money and not enjoying myself, I'd focus more on the business, which is really why you've seen the growth and the push in the business over the last 2 or 3 years.
Yeah. And if people want to buy records from you, how do they do that?
The main sales platform I use these days is Discogs, and if you would look on there, if you basically put into the search field ENTHUCOL, ENTHUCOL, which is basically a compression of enthusiastic collector. If you put ENTHUCOL into the search field, it will basically bring up a bunch of stuff that either I'm selling or I have credits on. And if you click on one of the ones that I'm selling and then view sellers' other items, that will bring the whole inventory up. And at the moment, there's something like, I don't know, normally in the region of about 1,600 titles on there. There's a second Discogs account that links from that where the previously owned and enjoyed vinyl is listed. I still have a couple of hundred items on eBay at any given time, but they tend only to be either newer reissues or fast-moving lines. But again, same ID for the eBay account, ENTHUCOL. Basically, if you contact me through either of those platforms, I can also add you to my database for my mailing list, which is an email-based list, which generally something goes out most weeks. There's either a newsletter of new reissues, or from time to time there are lists of rare and collectible original pressings. So there's kind of at least 3 ways you can contact me.
Okay, that's good news for everybody listening on Soundfusion Radio. Thanks for that. I've just got 2 last questions. What is the most expensive reggae piece of vinyl that you've ever heard of? And why do you think it was so expensive? And secondly, what is it that makes reggae so special?
Yeah, I mean, the vinyl, I mean, that almost changes on a monthly basis, but off the top of my head, the most expensive piece I can remember sold through eBay a few months ago. There was a copy of a record called So Weary by the Minstrels, which is one of the, if not the rarest tune on Neritone. I mean, it wasn't in particularly good condition. I think it was only graded VG minus, scribble over all of the label, but it's still kind of top $3,000, which is a staggering sum for a record in that condition. It is purely the rarity of it, and I think that's endorsed by the fact that although they put out approaching 50 Meritone singles and several LPs as well, the Japanese dub store people behind that reissue series haven't reissued So Weary, and I believe that's because they haven't actually been able to find a good enough source. I mean, I know of one decent copy, but the person in possession of that doesn't want it reissued, so won't actually provide a run-off. So, whether we'll ever see a reissue of that or not, I don't know, but it's one that I get asked for literally every week. In terms of why the music is so great, I mean, I guess that presumes that as a collector I only buy one type of music, which just isn't true, and I don't think anybody who truly is an enthusiast for music would only ever buy one genre or one era of music. I mean, there's the famous Duke Ellington quote, isn't there? There's only 2 types of music, good and the other one. Why do you make a music? I just think there's an honesty about it. It doesn't really have any pretenses. I mean, there's a classic moment in the what was the series on Channel 4 that Mikey Clegg put together way back in the early 80s. Can't remember the name of the series now, but Root something or the other. There was 6 volumes of it. And in one of those volumes, some guys come into a producer's yard to audition. And there's basically 3 groups of 3 guys. They're very obviously from country, and they come in and they sing their song from the heart. and that really is what is most endearing about Jamaican music. You know, so many of the great recordings aren't from career artists like Alton Ellis and Laurel Aitken and Sugar Minott and whoever else, but are from little individual artists who only made kind of 1 or 2 records, and they were written and sung from the heart, and that's what really comes through, the truth of it.
Okay, well, thanks very much, Phil. Thanks for giving up your time, coming on the show. It's been a real pleasure talking to you. And, you know, I hope that your business prospers and flourishes and you continue to give us great music.
Oh, well, thanks for that, Geoff, and I appreciate the invite to chat with you on the show. And, yeah, business prospering and flourishing would be nice, but, yeah, just being given more days by the Creator would be good.
Okay.